Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I'm preparing to check in on a couple systems that we last visited 10 days ago, and at that point they'd already come off 20 days of what I call foraging. So today on day 30 of foraging, these two 310-day-old European nightcrawler systems are what I've got in my sights. And kind of a weird thing I noticed. I took a little peek on the side of the container here and I see, I don't know if it's visible, but I definitely see what appears to me like worm castings deposited all along here, as well as a little trail in a couple spots, suggesting to me that these worms have been on the move, kind of exploring outside of their territory. And, well, we talked about possibly during this visit setting these little guys up for a horizontal migration. I even see a couple worm carcasses over there with springtails surrounding them. And well, I guess what I was about to say was we suggested a horizontal migration starting in these systems possibly in today's next check-in, and I am prepared to do that if we see that everything's in the right shape, and I think it will be. So why don't we get these systems up on the bench and we're going to get that thing started. All right, let's go. All right, I've got bin number one over here tipped up pretty much as high as I dare without fear of having the whole contents dump out. And just to, kind of get this a little closer to the camera so you can see all these castings that the worms left for some reason. I mean, it's not terribly huge, just a little trail of maybe just a couple worms, leaving a little bit of a mess behind, but I've scraped it all off. And the other one we looked at over here, this was actually, their arrangement was different up on the shelf. This is where we saw a couple springtails working on the carcasses of a couple deceased worms over there on the edge. And over here in bin number one was where we were periodically finding remnants of a compostable bag we tried composting with these little guys and other things. It is interesting how certain things almost appear to have been ejected out of the bedding by being left out here on the surface. And they're both things that would be the sort of things I typically go ahead and extract, because I assume that something like this looks very much like bits and pieces of the compostable bag that I've held on to scraps of, and this could very well be the same stuff. And this was just a bigger chunk of it, but it did become this weird stringy kind of stuff. And here and there I keep bumping into leftovers of it. Now, last time when we came in here 10 days ago, these had been pieces of newspaper draped out across the top surface. And since that bubble wrap was out on top, these sort of got nibbled away. And I thought they'd see greater breakdown by being left out there for the worms on the surface, but maybe it just wasn't of much interest to them. So let's get it out of our way. This stuff will come in handy as supplemental bedding to be used when we set up the horizontal migration feeding zones in these two systems. I guess these boxes will also come in handy so we can extract a couple slow long-term items that have been in both of these systems for some time now. I mean, over here in bin number two, I believe, was where there was two items, a husk of a mango seed, which is not that, that's the pumpkin stem. Here's one piece of it, and here's another piece of it, and then the pumpkin stem was the other slow composting item over here in bin number two. Poor wormies. It's a good thing we've got a cleanup crew. And over here in bin number one was just the husk of a mango seed. I'll tell you, this stuff is so flimsy anymore. If you've ever handled one of those things, they're pretty tough. They're tough material, and for it to feel so soft and like just breaking away in my hand here already, it's pretty cool to see. And man, oh man, have these worms left a nice batch of castings here in both systems. Even last time we could tell how nice and crumbly it all seemed and how nice and damp it all was. Yeah, here in bin number two, it seems like things are perhaps a little bit clumpy out here on the surface. but I'm curious to see how things look after we sort of stir everything together. I mean, we're going to have to nudge it all over so we can set up the horizontal migration. So as long as we're at it, this will give us a chance to check it all out, see how it all looks. Aerate it at the same time. This stuff really does look nice. I see all these little white spots. Makes me wonder if I'm looking at springtails or leftover scraps of the grit that I apply. These systems were fed 25 times up until day 280 when they got their 25th feeding. And it was at day 280, it seemed like a good time to cut them loose on foraging. And even prior to that, I believe that the last few feedings had just been stuff like coffee and worm chow, with the whole idea being that minimal leftovers would be the nicest thing to see in time. And I think that's kind of where we're at in bin number 1. Let's see how bin number 2 looks. The material feels pretty much the same in both systems. Here I'm getting this feeling like maybe there's a little bit more moisture down low within this stuff, where perhaps the top has had a chance to begin drying. And I believe that part of the setup is going to be to not only just set up horizontal migration by setting up a feeding zone on one or the other edge of the system. I think that leaving the bubble wrap off the portions of the systems that we're trying to see depopulated and evacuated will help this stuff grow a little bit drier, perhaps motivating the worms to look for something else to hang out in and just leave it voluntarily. All right, yeah, something caught my eye. Something that, I don't know, every now and then I bump into something, but it, it won't tear, won't break. Well, it did break, but it was very tough to break it. And I think it's maybe, just from the look of it, possibly clear plastic window after a little windowed envelope might have snuck into my collection of paper that eventually gets shredded. Luckily I don't see too much weird stuff, but sometimes little bits and pieces of things make their way into my bedding collection. So this migration is going to be segmented off using what used to be a box that a 12-pack of ramen noodle soup came in. So I cut it down the middle, and I thought that I could just cut it one more time to give each one a little bit of a wing, and it'll even have a little bit of a floor. But I think this is going to become what we like to set up as sort of a little bit of a divider to help keep the castings separate from all the shreds of paper and stuff that are used to set up the horizontal migration feeding zone, hopefully resulting in some castings that are pretty much free of any sort of debris. So this is kind of what I had in mind here. We get to even try out how it works with the double layer being here as part of the wall versus the double layer being down here as the floor. I had hoped to carve them out the same way, but doesn't matter really. Let's begin setting up the horizontal migration feeding zone for these little guys. I guess we'll stack it up, and we can go pretty high. We got a nice tall wall here. Let's just see as much of the casting material get over onto this side, and as much as possible leave the floor of the horizontal migration feeding zone clean. Oh, these castings are really nice. It'll be nice when we get around to harvesting this stuff, but we're going to let the worms evacuate. We're going to try something different. Normally the surface that's dividing the feeding zone from the finished castings is perforated to make it really easy for the worms to pass through. But on this occasion I thought I might try it without and see what we end up with. So I just took those boxes, I sort of put a couple cuts in them, and they're pretty much all set to go as our little partition walls. I mean, when I put the holes in there, it's kind of giving them little access routes through it to get over into the horizontal migration feeding zone. Here, they're going to have to just sort of either chew their way through or, well, I don't know. Is this one taller? Maybe we need it over here. Yeah, let's try it that way. Well, I think the whole idea is going to be that they're going to go around, basically. That's sort of what I had in mind. Now, I've got a little bit of my shredded paper cardboard mix here, just dry. I thought we could use some of this as the very bottom foundation, because all kinds of goodness can drip down into it. If we put it on top, then it's got less of a chance to get all kinds of juices and everything else flowing down towards it. Figured that would be a good place to put it, and you know, as long as we're putting stuff down low, let's return these slow composting items so that the worms can continue them in their new homes. But before we put the fresh stuff in, I figured we can get this stuff laid out and reused. Very nice. Alrighty, and then the yummy stuff that we've got for them is cantaloupe melon rinds. And is this another piece of cantaloupe melon? I believe it is. And this is celery now. Celery, and you probably recognize the watermelon rinds. So let's get the rest of this stuff in here. All stuff that's going to hopefully bring with it a nice bit of juiciness and dampness to help further moisten some of the stuff that's below it. I mean, the stuff that had been top covering still has a little bit of dampness to it, but the stuff right below it was put in pretty much dry. And now I think we've got enough substance, so to speak, to see how the feeding zone holds up to the pressure of having the finished castings butted up against it. I don't want to pack it down or make it tight or anything like that. I like the idea of leaving it all nice and loose so that it can sort of breathe a little bit. And man, oh man, are these castings beautiful. I mean, if I had to choose one or the other, I think just based on the handling of it today, I would almost say that the stuff I saw in bin number 1 over there is a little bit finer than what I see over here in bin number 2, but I could be wrong. I'm just noticing little bits of clumpiness here and there, which I'm sure will resolve as the stuff starts to dry out. Like I said earlier, we're going to cover this stuff up in such a way that the feeding zone is definitely going to be well protected from drying out and evaporation. But I figured all the finished casting sides over here, these sides, I thought we could just leave uncovered for the most part and just let it air dry. And hopefully some of this clumpiness I'm seeing here and there will start to vanish. So I think that's it. Let's come in here with, oh, it's not it. Because, you know, I even bought some more food. Besides the yummy kitchen scraps, I've also got some coffee. A couple days worth of coffee for these little guys. But let's get all this real tempting stuff out here covered up. And then we don't have to worry so much about any sort of passerby pests noticing the goodness that's down here for the wormies and trying to come in and capitalize. Try to keep all this yummy melon covered up. But we've also got another thing to cover up the melon with, which is coffee. So let's give each system their fair share of coffee. And you know, I've even got a fresh batch of worm chow, stuff that I just replenished my supply of yesterday, so I've got a whole jar of it. So I think we're gonna be super generous and give these little guys a real treat. You know, after 30 days of not getting fed, and being tasked with foraging through the system, I think they're due for a little bit of a treat, and hopefully they appreciate it. So traditionally we just use our good old coffee filter as our feeding zone indicator. Not that we would have a hard time coming back here and figuring out where we last fed. I think it's pretty obvious. And I think even though the feeding zone indicator is suggested to be something that's out there to be easily seen, so we can easily identify where we last fed, since it doesn't seem all that important, I just figure we'd be just a little bit more generous with the bedding. Just try to bring the level up a little bit more. Give the worms a little something to cruise over into and explore. And that looks pretty good to me. See how it looks with the plastic covers. So the plastic covers, I guess, will just have to go on sort of folded. If what we're interested in seeing here is a little bit more airflow. So, yeah, you know, let's kind of set it up this way. I guess a certain portion of the finished casting is pretty close to the partition wall will also be covered. But all this out here being uncovered, I think will definitely help it begin drying. And let's do it the same way. Kind of butter it up to the wall there a little bit, and then drape it back. So I'm not sure. This to me definitely seems like something that'll continue breaking down. We'll put it right where it belongs. And, you know, perhaps one final thing we could include, as long as we're prepared to do so, is moisture. Moisture is going to be, I think, one of the key things that these worms are going to be drawn to. We provide a good amount of it. And don't forget, we've got a bunch of stuff on the very bottom that is dry. I mean, like I said earlier, it'll get moistened as the fruits that are right above it start to thaw and release their juices. But I think what we just did there is going to help a lot too. So what do you think? Is it a good horizontal migration feeding zone? Did we prep something that the worms are going to appreciate? And what do you think about leaving it uncovered? I believe that leaving it uncovered is probably a really good way to see the stuff start to dry and possibly in itself become a reason that the worms might want to consider exploring and finding something a little bit more cozy to be in, leading them over into the feeding zones. And what do you think about the partition not being perforated? Definitely a departure from my norm, right? But hey, we'll see how it goes. All right, everyone, that's it for our check-in with the European night crawlers on day 310. 280 days composting, 30 days foraging, and now we're into the migration stage. So it'll be cool to see how long it takes to see no worms out here any longer, but I'm in no hurry. Let it take as long as it has to take. All right, everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.